Hi everyone, welcome to my third process video. Thanks for voting on my Instagram for what you'd like to see in more detail. So I'll try to do my best to explain my process as I'm going along here. And if you have any questions, as always, just drop them in the comments below. All right, so let's get started. So starting off with the sketch, I'm using the reference feature in Procreate, just drawing what I see instead of doing a loose trace over like I've done before. And I start with a very loose sketch. I try to use a larger brush so that I'm forced not to try to put in too many details there. And I'll do a lot of layers of sketching as I continue to refine it. So here on the new layer, I've started refining the sketch a bit. Nothing super fancy yet, but still more defined than the loose shapes from before. And this is when I'll try to make sure my proportions and everything looks right and correct. And using the liquify tool to help me achieve that as well for any areas that I'm struggling in. I play a lot with the placement of facial features. I'm really grateful for the selection tool that I can easily just take each little piece and resize it and move it around until I'm happy with how it looks. Just a little side note, when doing any Frozen fan art, I must, of course, watch Frozen as I make said fan art. So I watched it a little bit out of order. I watched Frozen 2, then the first Frozen, then Frozen 2 again. I was actually gonna try to watch something else after finishing Frozen 2, the Frozen 1, and I just wanted to watch Frozen 2 again because I love the soundtrack so much. It was really getting me in the mood. It was so inspiring. So I think that played a big part in helping my piece turn out so well because I was really feeling it. Okay, so here on a new layer, I'm going to be drawing on the hands in a different color as well. I am doing it on a new layer because I don't want to have to worry about affecting the hair or her dress underneath because I know I'm going to need to adjust the hand many times. Hands are hard. So yeah, I'm just doing that on a separate layer. It just makes things easier in the long run. So if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I don't really include the line art in my final pieces. Now I am doing not exactly line art here, but Definitely a very refined sketch with more details just to help me out when I'm putting down my colors. Usually I do like to edit more so as I color and render versus as I am sketching. I don't know why, I just find it easier that way sometimes, but since this is something I was doing a little bit differently, it was a bit complicated with the hair. The facial expression was something a little bit out of my comfort zone. I really wanted to spend time on the sketch to make the rendering process easier and to make sure, again, that I was happy with everything, how everything looked. Also, if you've noticed my bubble tea, it's kind of a funny story because the previous night, I was just checking out to see how much it would be to Uber Eats some bubble tea because I had some coupon codes and I accidentally placed the order, not meaning to, but I was just trying to see the price and actually clicked place order by accident, and I ended up getting 3 bubble teas, 1 for Kane, 2 for me, so I ended up having a nice one while I was drawing, and it was quite refreshing. But it's definitely not an accident I regret. getting into my favorite part, laying the flat colors and rendering. It's a lot easier when you're working with fan art or a Draw This in Your Style challenge because you can just color pick right off that original image. Now I am using a different image here to color pick than the one I used as a reference, just because Elsa is very, she's in the shade, has quite the shadow on her behind that window, and that window, the glass there is also would be affecting how the color of her skin actually looks. So I wanted to do everything slightly more vibrant and true to maybe if she was in the daylight, and then add a layer of color that would mimic the shadow and the tint of the window as well. So all my flat colors have been laid down. I've color picked a nice dark purple shadow for her skin, and I'm actually only using that one color for all of the shading in her skin because it'll blend out really nicely. And I'm using that Jing Sketch Master Smudge blending brush, or smudge brush I guess I should say, and it just smooths out so nicely. I just continue to work at it until I get a very overall blended gradient look, and then I'll go in and continue to go in with that shading color and a smaller smudge brush size to add a more detailed or sharp shadow. For the nose, I'm just doing that solid shading color. It's kind of like a pie shape if the pie was very small and the piece was cut very fat. So I rounded out a little bit as well around the edges. And then I usually just leave it like that and maybe add a highlight on it a little bit later. I guess this is just kind of my style, but I like how it looks. For the rest of the rendering process, I'm just going to continue doing the same thing with the round render paintbrush from the Jing Sketch collection. And I'll just keep going in with that, a darker color of whatever layer I'm on, and I'll shadow it in and blend it out and shade it in some more and blend it out some more. also really like to use the eraser tool to really define edges, especially between fingers or other parts where I really want to distinguish that, hey, these are two separate things. It's all the same color, but they're two separate things. Whenever I add nails, I just use a white, go in and reduce the opacity of the layer until I'm happy with how it looks. I can't recall exactly what opacity I reduced it down for this, but it just adds that touch of elegance, and you can see it in the reference photo as well. Doing her fur hood was a little bit more of a challenge. Here I'm just blending and softening out the edges of it so that it looks a little bit more furry, but I'll be playing a lot more with it later on for sure. So I'm just going to go in with the shadows again now because it is in a cooler light. I'm using more of a blue toned shadow, blending that out. Kate Fox's fur brushes here. I really liked the effect it gave because it not only just itself had that look of fur, but it also varied the color a little bit in each strand as I brushed it on. So I thought I got a lot more of a natural, furry looking effect here, as you can see, and I'm still adjusting the colors to keep it brighter, a little bit darker in some areas on top of what color variations the brush is adding itself. Just softening out the edges a little bit more, making it look a little bit more stylized and natural to go along with the style of my image. And now the hair. I hate doing hair, especially braids. This was quite a challenge, and I spent most of my time, aside from the sketch, working on rendering her hair here. I take a similar approach when doing hair with each of my pieces, and I try to isolate the chunks of hair with a dark shadow, and I'll do all of the dark shadows first, and then I'll continue to do some lighter shadows and finish off with the highlights. I thought how I'd blocked out some of the colors for her hair chunks here looked a little bit off, so I'm just fixing that up before I continue. So I ended up going with a more grayish tone to shade her hair with, and I'm just doing that, blending in all the dark shadows, or blocking them in first, then I'll blend them out, and just trying to stick as accurately to the image as I can, especially since braids are so tough. I just wanted to stick to the image and not stretch too far from that. For For the blending, I'm not being too careful because I still will be going over it several more times. But I do try to not blend it out into areas that I know will be highlighted. Continue making it more defined. I'm actually going in with a darker color now, just in the braids, as you can see, and some of those corners there, it's quite dark. It's like the little gaps in each chunk of hair that is braided, and so it helps to define the braids a little bit. I'm just adding a little bit more of my flair to it here. I've gone in and very loosely sketched in some shades, and I am now erasing heavily around it to kind of give some interesting shadow dynamic to the hair. I don't really know how to explain it. I like how it looks. I'm also going to add in some little hair strands just around the edge of the hair for now. I like how it looks, makes it look a little bit more flowy and natural. And when I'm doing the highlights, I will add more individual strands as well. everything up, finalizing some of the details, anything that I missed, and I'm also going to add her blush as well shortly. For the blush, I use a mix of the Gaussian blur effect, the blending brush, the eraser, and I add some like speckly spray in a darker color as well to kind of just reflect maybe like isolated pigments in the makeup, if that makes sense. Start sketching out the gemstone details on her dress. This was definitely a challenge as well, since I haven't really done something like this before. I was getting the shapes down all right, but the placement was difficult since it was ever so slightly on an angle, and the coloring and rendering was just a disaster. So enjoy watching that part. It actually ended up turning out a lot better than I thought it would. Like, not perfect or anything, but I thought it looked pretty decent, especially considering I hadn't really done something like that before. Basically all for Elsa. As you've seen throughout, I've made various color adjustments or adjustments to the curves or the brightness, and I will do it a little bit more as well after the background's added. And if you're wondering also what I just did, because of the limits to Procreate's layers, especially if you have a larger file size, I'm always worried that I'll change my mind after I've merged some layers together, so I duplicate my files so many times so that at any point I can go back and rework something if I don't like how it's going, instead of having to start all the way over. Just color picked some different background colors here, very loosely shaded it in because it's all going to be blurry anyways, so I don't need to be detailed at all really about it. For the window panes, I was pretty lazy and I just used a grid brush and then enlarged that until it somewhat reflected the original image. So it framed her face pretty nicely, and I would have liked the panes to be taller and skinnier, but I just couldn't really figure it out, and I didn't really feel like figuring it out, and I thought it looked just fine. So I added some texture as well to that with the lighter color on top, just on a clipping mask. And then underneath, I'll be adding the window layer. In between that window layer and the pane layer, I'm adding with a textured brush. It's one of Poopy Cat's brushes as well. Adding some like frosty effects. And I think I put the layer blending mode onto screen and used the same color as what I had used for the window itself. And that window layer is just the flat color on a reduced opacity. And after 6 long hours, I have finally finished. I'm very happy with how it turned out, and here's a little alternate background I made for her as well. Thanks for watching.